Hello. I just wanted to quickly introduce the upcoming panel. So I'm going to introduce Dick Gephardt, who will be moderating. Dick is a longtime congressman from Missouri. He is a former House Majority Leader and the co-chair of the Council for Responsible Social Media. So please put your hands together in welcoming Dick and the next panel.
So I've had the chance before to meet these four wonderful citizens of our country, and you are in for a great panel. This is an all-star team. Frances Haugen, who many of you know from her experiences testifying in Congress, at the EU. She just told me a minute ago she was over in Singapore where they had a similar kind of conference. She's a tech expert. She worked at Google and Meta or Facebook or whatever it's called. And so she knows what's in the black box. So we're thrilled to have her here. And she's a personal hero to me because she's a person who puts people and public safety over herself. And that is the test that we all face. Frank McCourt, another hero of mine. He's an entrepreneur. He has a great background in business, real estate, sports, media, you name it, and he was good at it. But now he's taking on, with his personal time and his personal money, creating a better information culture in the world. Randi Weingarten, an old good friend, a labor leader in this country. She is president of the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, 1.7 million members, school professionals, teachers, others trying to help educate our children. And you're going to hear from her today, because I got to hear about it a minute ago, some practical things that can be done. Simple, practical things to protect our kids from all the harms that they're experiencing today. She is a labor leader who not only cares about her members, which she has to and should, but she cares about our country and our people. So thank you for being here. And she should be in Portland today because a strike in that local is starting. And as president, she should be there. I know she knows that. But she chose to break her schedule and be here today with us because she cares and is worried so much about this problem. So thank you, Randi, for doing that. The last panelist is somebody you've already heard from, and she is dazzlingly good. She's 22 years old. Just think about that. It's why I always say today that the kids today, the young people, are so much better than my generation. I mean, we don't hold a candle to these people. They care about the right things. They have hope. They have optimism that we can solve these problems. And she's already done that with the organization you've already heard about that is really helping people. And as I understand it, you've had research done on, does it really work? And something like 90% of the kids who can use your technology, it really works. So thank you for being here. So I'm going to start with the obvious question that we all have is this problem fixable? I mean, often we just kind of want to give up, right? It's too complicated. It's such a black box. Nobody really understands it. So maybe it'll get addressed 30 years from now, like we did with the printing press and the radio and the TV when those technologies came along. But don't we just have to wait? We can't do this. So I'm going to throw that one first to Francis, and then everybody else can pitch in. But is this problem fixable in any reasonable time frame?
It's interesting when I talk at events like this, there's like a fairly like a sense of dread almost off. They kind of like weighs in on the event as you go deeper and deeper into the problem. And people often feel kind of overwhelmed because we've been told very limited options on how to move forward, right? If I asked many people out in the United States today, like, should we act on social media? They would say, well, I worry about censorship. I worry about, having our democratic process suppressed. And even just that framing shows you how influential the tech companies have been at taking advantage of the fact that none of us get to study these systems on our own. We don't get to ask our own questions. We don't get to explore different paths and different solutions. I think one of the ways to begin getting excited about making these platforms better is to stop thinking about solutions as black and white things, that there are many, many shades of gray. Like was mentioned earlier, like should we kick kids off of platforms or not kick them off? What about sleep deprivation? There's a lot of these things where we can talk about making them safer for kids. Like we can talk about having age appropriate technologies, different spaces for kids, cutting them off at different ages depending on how old they are. There's a lot of different ways to solve these problems. And when we start from the idea that there are no solutions, we start to believe, it gets very hard for us to mobilize fast enough or quickly enough to actually demand more. And so one of the major things my nonprofit Beyond the Screen is working on is we're working on a harms and solutions mapping exercise so that we can begin to say, like, what is the large space of options we have? This is something that was made possible by Frank McCourt and Project Liberty. And I think it's one of those things where if we could sit around a table together and say, we have thousands and thousands of options about how we could tweak these platforms, suddenly it would be a lot easier for us to go march on the Capitol or to call in, because we could actually say, is there a common layer that we can agree on should be the floor? So these are solvable. It begins with things like transparency, so we can learn our own answers, ask our own questions. But we can do this, and we don't have to wait 20 years.
Terrific. Frank?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Dick. And I would say most definitely. And I agree with you, Francis, that these conversations they're very heavy, right? I mean, when you're talking about loss of life and the harms to kids and so forth, it's tough. And I think, and we need to recognize that, by the way, and we need to spread the word, right? I mean, not everybody knows there's a problem. Not everybody's connected to technology and to social media. And we need policies like COSA and new laws and so forth. But we also need to fix the technology. And the reason I say that is that, I'm an infrastructure person. So I come from a family that's been building things for 5 generations in this country and around the world. That's 130 years. And if you think about the way this technology was designed, and I'm talking about the internet now, it was never designed for people. It was designed to connect devices, right? Connect computers. So today, by the way, the internet is almost 60 years old. It's old technology. The World Wide Web is over 30 years old. It's old technology. So yet today, 60 years later, we're still a device on the internet. We're not a person. We're an IP address, right? So a technology that was built for machines, and now we see the machines taking over, is not good for us. We need to re-architect the internet, not throw it away. There's lots of great things with the internet, but re-architect it for people. If you take a architecture that is designed to exploit our data, and we'll probably talk more about data, right? Because our social graph, our data, our digital DNA, call it what you will, is what these big platforms are exploiting. But that's what they're doing. They're exploiting it. It's an exploitive architecture. And when you have an exploitive of people, by the way, and their property and their data, you're going to get lots and lots of bad results, along with some good ones, but lots and lots of harm. And so just if we step back and think about this from an infrastructure perspective, and because the internet, by the way, doesn't have to work the way it works. It just does because we've adopted a few protocols and agreed that's how it will work. But we're stuck in this space, I fear, where we think it has to be this way. And how do we mitigate damage? Well, it doesn't have to be this way. We can fix it from the ground up, actually quite easily. Fixing it won't be the hard part. It will be getting people to actually understand that they're not stuck in this terrible place, but there's actually a new and better internet. So that's why we say better web, better world, because it really is the case. So I do want people to be left with a hopeful message that this problem can be fixed. This is not like we don't have 30 years though. You know, we have a short window.
We have very large tech companies with very big press budgets that have an interest in us believing there's no way forward. Usually that means there might be something beyond that.
So, Francis was the one who actually gave me hope that we could fix it. That one, we did a webinar, I don't know how long ago now. It feels like yesterday, but I think it was several months ago. It was interesting how some people attempted to contort that webinar after we did it. But what it did was it enabled us to do a very deep dive. And as someone who is not a digital native, so half of what Frank just said, I probably don't understand, and I'm gonna have to ask my staff or Trisha what he actually just meant. But I'm teasing about that because for those kind of parents and grandparents who are like, oh my God, what the hell does all this, excuse my language, does all this mean? What we tried to do after that work with Francis is say, what can we do to fix it? And we, this summer, with a group of students and parents and the American Psychological Association, all put out this report. You can get it on our website. I think I have it's called Likes versus Learning, the Real Cost of Social Media for Schools. But my point in doing this is that we have very simple solutions that if they could do, these tech companies, Meta, Mark, TikTok, they could do these this afternoon. Let's see, what time is it? 4:15? They could do it by 4:30. That's how easy it is. All they have to do in their platforms, I'm just going to give you 3 of them. All they have to do in their platforms is, number 1, create the default position to the most private. So a kid or a parent would have to actually change it. Create it, am I getting this right? Create it to the most private. That's number 1. Number 2, automatic scroll or infinite scroll and automatic play. They can just stop that. Stop it. That is a pretty simple algorithmic change that they could do. Number 3, and this is what we were talking about before, I would actually say number 3, don't do notifications during the school day. That would actually create, because kids are addicted to this. And so if you stop the notifications during the school day, it would actually help us stop some of the addiction. And number 4, sorry, I said 3, I meant 4. I'm a social studies teacher, not a math teacher. In schools, let us have a kind of hotline. So if there is cyberbullying or something like that, that instead of us attempting to figure out how to get to Meta, through, doing something in terms of a chat and finally getting a response, 2 weeks later, and then having to go to the police and having to do all of this through human behavior and human time. Have a hotline in every school. So there's cyberbullying and all these things. We can get something resolved within 24 hours. And then if you use your technology and this, so all I'm saying is we could fix those things within a day. We don't even need to change the immunity laws to fix those things. But that's the kind of, so after talking to Francis, then we started the kind of, village about what can we do that's really simple, that parents and teachers can start fighting together to get these tech companies to change these things.
Trisha?
Yeah, I mean, so many great comments, and just a couple of things that I think I'll echo and add. I mean, when you think about my technology and my work, the concept is so simple, right? I mean, it's almost ridiculous how simple it is. And it would be so simple to implement, right? And so, I mean, my answer to the question, are these problems fixable? Absolutely. And we have, a bunch of interventions, Randy just highlighted a bunch, that would be great for schools, but we have a bunch of interventions that are effective, that do work, that can be implemented. So it's not a question of whether or not we can fix these issues. We absolutely can fix these issues. The question is, when are we going to do it? Because we absolutely need to, and we know that there are solutions out there. So that's the first thing I'll say. The other thing I'll say, just to jump off the comment about people's perception of the solution space, I think you brought up a really great point. Part of the reason I think people have, such a narrow view of the solution space is because of who we're talking to and who we're not talking to. Youth are very regularly at the table, right? And I think this point was made earlier. Youth are are often not regularly at the table, right? When we're thinking about solutions, but they're the ones who have the lived experience and have all sorts of creative ideas, right, on what we could do to tackle these harms. I had a young person I was talking to the other day that said, how great would it be if I could just choose, for instance, the kind of algorithmic experience I wanted, to be able to turn off algorithms, give me the agency to decide what my feed looks like. A very simple solution that could be very easily implemented. That comes from lived experience, right? And frustration with using social media. So I think, part of the reason that we have such a narrow view of what solutions are possible, yes, part of it is a PR campaign, but part of it too is we don't engage all the groups we have to engage. We're thinking about what solutions mean and what solutions are required, right? What solutions are needed. The other thing that I'll share in addition to that when it comes to, solutions and solution making is these are complicated problems, right? I was talking about, we have so many simple solutions. That's not to say the problems are not complicated. I mean, they are absolutely complicated problems, but we can bring together stakeholders from, a variety of backgrounds to think through the nuances. And I think that that's another thing that's been missing. Part of the reason I love, you mentioned when you're putting together the survey, you engage parents, you engage, teachers, you engaged youth. I would like to see, as a technologist, I would like to see more technologists be a part of the conversation, right? I would like to see, people from industry be part. I would like to see scientists. I think that's one of the best parts of today is you've seen so many people from so many different backgrounds, right, on the stage thinking about these issues from different perspectives. But often we don't have that, right? We sometimes have, maybe policymakers working, in a silo, or you have, companies working in a silo, not talking to each other, assuming that there's no common ground. There's no way we're going to, make any type of substantive progress if we're not working together. There's no way we're going to be able to actually work through what are complicated challenges that have, a lot of nuances where there is a lot of gray. There's no way we're going to be able to navigate the gray if we're not talking to each other. So I would just say, acknowledge the complexity, bring everyone in to think about that complexity. There's a lot of power in that.
Dick, I think those are great, really great points. But I also want to expand our thinking a little bit so that it's not shutting off the algorithms only, right?
Sure.
Or it's, look, we're learning that our data is very valuable. And why would we want 4 or 5 platforms to aggregate all that data
Yeah.
and then apply whatever they want to apply to it, right? To manipulate us, right? So why not flip the script, own and control our own data, and then decide on what terms we'll share that data with new apps that are built in a way that meets the standards we're talking about, rather than constraining these beasts. And by the way, they need to be constrained, so we need to do both. It's triage and new building, but let's think differently,
Yeah.
and we're not stuck with these 5 platforms, right? And by the way, if we are stuck with these 5 platforms, the generative AI game is over, because they're the only ones that have all the data that drive generative AI. Lastly, I just wanted to make one point. Randi, in what you said, which I agree with, you mentioned the addictive nature, right? Kind of very quickly. In what world do we allow something that's highly addictive, more than drugs, okay? In what world do we just allow it to happen to our kids? Allow it to happen to our society, allow it to happen to our democracy, allow it to happen to our civil, or lack of civil discourse. It is just morally wrong.
May I, or, I mean, I hesitated about using the word, but the more I watch it, and the more I watch young adults in particular, and watch parents and teachers wrestling with how they're going to compete with this, the more I think we have to call out what it is in love, but call out what it is. And I think that part of where I've gotten to is, what is the leverage? There's a moral outrage that we all have, but what is the leverage we have to fix it? And part of the leverage, unfortunately, is going to be dealing with the immunity. Because if we don't deal with the immunity statute, everybody also always calls it 230, but I want to call it what it is. If we don't deal with that, what's going to be the check and balance that a school district has, that a parent has? Because all of this is now profits over people. And we have to figure out, kind of just like with OxyContin and all these other addictive things, how do we fight it?
Here.
So I would say like the layering. So when it came to things like OxyContin, we had independent sources of truth. So we had autopsy reports that said this person died with like 6 OxyContin in their bloodstream. Or like the thing that allowed the FDA to actually do something in the end was that they found people who didn't have any other drugs in their bloodstream other than prescribed OxyContin, who still died even though it was given to them the way it was prescribed. Like they didn't abuse it at all. They still died of an overdose. Right now, we live in a world with these highly habit-forming technologies that people actively say they use in compulsive ways, where none of us get to have independent sources of truth. The direction that I thought Frank was going to go is he often talks about new business models, like the idea that we need to have platforms that are not owned and operated by for-profit companies that report on public stock exchanges. We need creator-owned social networks. We need social networks that are owned by their users, because we've gotten so used to being passive subjects to our digital kings, where our only options are to change platforms instead of being citizens who have ownership and interest in where we are. But we don't get to have those free market conversations or comparisons if the only thing we compare 2 social platforms on are marketing messages. Parents can't choose to use safer products if they can't see even basic data on like which platforms have the most kids on at 2 a.m. So transparency has to be where we start, and it shouldn't be political, right? Saying we deserve to have ingredient labels on our foods so we're not misled, or ingredient labels on our social platforms so we're not misled, should be something we can all agree to.
So let me ask a question of all of you. because these last comments raised the big question to me, which is, what do we need to do at Council for Responsible Social Media, other organizations that want to advocate solutions that can come from our government? We're working real hard on COSA right now, and we're very hopeful that we can get it done with a lot of the people in this room. But in listening to all of you, you suggested there are real solutions here. Some of them can simply be done by people, but some of it takes, I think, guardrail legislation, right? So I guess I'd ask, in your opinion, what would be your top 3 candidates for legislative vehicles that Congress could do, that the government could do, that would really move this needle?
Well, I think we have to be realistic here. This is, like I said, old technology, lots of harms that have been done, right? You think of, ironically, OxyContin came on the market the same time, basically, Web 2, okay? And look at how long it's taken, right, for our, to get on top of that and fix that. It's done a lot of damage to kids as well, right? And people, adults in this country and elsewhere. So what am I saying? I think our political apparatus is a bit different, Dick, than when you were there, okay? Disabled, by the way, in large measure by social media, all right? So let's call it out. Our political leadership is either unaware of how the technology works and or taking lots of money from these big tech platforms and or using them to get reelected, because it's those extremes that donate the money, right? So, you know, I see several of the mums here that we've spent time together with. We've done something we hope is helpful in terms of getting COSA passed, so we support that. But I've also been very frank with you in saying that we need a bigger fix, because we have a political environment that actually is not responding at the speed that the problem merits, okay? That's why I say we also need to innovate here. We can't just wait for the political apparatus. Maybe in your day, and I said this to you in the green room, you know, citizens would identify a problem, they'd go to elected officials, you'd listen to the experts in the field, and you'd say, you know what, I'm gonna do something about that, because while I'm here in this seat, I have power to do that. I'm gonna make life better for my constituents and for my fellow citizens. That's not the environment we live in right now, unfortunately. And so we're going to have to really show up in a different way. And by the way, big tech is relying on us not forming a coalition, right? The old expression, divide and conquer, it's like the oldest thing in the book. When we come together and are not divisible is when we'll make a change.
Can I, off of what all 3 of our colleagues on the stage, Dick, have said, can I make a suggestion that maybe that is not fully formed, so it could be a really stupid suggestion. I'm just warning people. But why not use the power of the free market and of innovation to do a transparency device in the way in which Francis is talking about, that kind of helps work with what Trish put together, so that what happens is that instead of it being, you know, small new companies that start competing with big tech, which would be fantastic to have as well. Yes, I know I am a labor leader and a worker talking about free markets, but say we did something like that, that people could then grab onto and impose on top of this and do the transparency themselves. And so that we can actually take that data back from them. And then the other thing I would say is that would be kind of a free market way of doing something. But the other thing I would say is we have an opportunity because of the unknown of generative AI. When you have a room where even Elon Musk says this could destroy us if not done well, there's an unknown that in that liminal space, we could solve some of these issues. Not everything, but we could solve something like changing the immunity statute or doing something else that helps bootstrap this change on top of what needs to happen to create guardrails for generative AI.
Randy, this is like, I'm always like, I never try to talk about negative things towards the end because we all come out kind of downer from events like this. So there have been academics who have embraced this kind of strategy for like 5-6 years, where they'll go and say, let's get together, let's have 20,000 people volunteer to send back their ads to Facebook so we can see, like, is Facebook lying about their political ad database? And Facebook threatened to sue them, right? Like, part of why PATA has safe harbor provisions in it is because Facebook has repeatedly, when people have gathered data on their own or tried to question the data that they're providing, the thing they come back with is, here's a lawsuit. And this has happened in things like the political ads database in terms of people trying to see the whole database, things like that, threatened to sue them. That the person got sued, trying to be sued there was a grad student. She lost the whole thing. And so we need our government to step in and say, if we want to have free market competition, we have to have access to the truth. Like, that's the grounding of free market competition, of getting to innovate our way out of these problems. And the only thing I'm a strong proponent of COSA. I think COSA is a great place to start. We should pass it now. It's been too many decades since we last took care of kids on the internet. But I do think we need to take maybe a second look at PATA and come in and say, usually the way bills are written is they go through, leaders of committees are involved, or we start from a set of principles around what transparency could look like, or we workshop a little bit more like how to come at it, because PATA hasn't gotten much movement since it came on the scene 2 years ago. And we have to stop treating transparency as a second thought. The last thing on COSA, don't let them negotiate transparency out of COSA. I don't know if that ended up being in the end bill or not, but without transparency, we cannot have accountability.
I'm just going to, I agree with all of that. I'm just going to, you mentioned Elon Musk, right? So, the whole thing with Zuckerberg and Threads and the two of them arguing, you stole my data. No, it's my data. Is that strange to any of you that they should be talking about their data? It's our data. We created it. It's our value. And that's, I just am, I'm for all of the things that make the existing architecture better, but I just really want to again, on a hopeful note, it doesn't have to work this way. It really doesn't. And if we take our data back, ownership and control of it, and create a non-exploitive, human-centric internet, a lot of the problems we have go away. If you have exploitive architecture, it will exploit. And that's why the harms are being done.
One other thing I'll add is just one thing that strikes me, I was born in 2000, which means the last internet law passed by the US Congress, 1996, before I was born. And I think what that reflects with both, the way that technology is also advancing and growing so quickly is we cannot approach technology legislation maybe the same way that we approach other legislation, which is, we pass it and then we're like, okay, 20 years later, we'll come back to it. That is not going to work, right? Clearly, we need to have a more agile, iterative approach in the way that we are pursuing technology legislation. So, I also, endorse COSA. I think a lot of the legislative movement that we see is fantastic. But to me, when we think about tech policy, it cannot be, oh, we need to pass this one law. It needs to be a mindset. Right? It needs to be a long-term mindset of, okay, as we watch this space evolve, what can we do to continually protect vulnerable groups like youth? Because the truth is, even if we pass COSA, and we say, woohoo, we did that, generative AI is on the scene. There are going to be a ton of new technologies on the scene. And that's going to be enough for some time. And then we're going to have to consider new guardrails, right? We're going to have to think innovatively and in ways that we haven't before when it comes to policy. If we're not constantly doing that as a mindset, as opposed to just thinking about specific pieces of legislation, we're going to fall behind, just like we did in the last 3 decades. So I would just say, part of it is the what of policy, but part of it is the how too. And I would say, let's please be, a little bit more, a little bit more constant and continual, right, in the way that we're
Did you see
approaching
the
this
article in the Times about Dr. Suzuki and climate change?
I did not know.
It was so interesting because he basically said the same thing about, he talked about, he's 87 now, and he said he's afraid that we've lost the battle, or the war actually, because we've fought too many little battles and we didn't create the mindset shift that was culturally required. Exactly what you just said. And it's, I think, a great learning for what we're up against with technology.
Absolutely.
Wow, what a panel. This has been a treat. I'm going to open it up for 2 questions, which we would have time for. Right over here. Can somebody get a mic over there? There we go. Thank you.
Hello. My question is for Frank. Last year, Disinformation Governance Board was established in the United States, and it was shut down in 1 month. Do you think that was a step in right direction, and will such a board come back again in future? Thank you.
Well, I think we need to create new protocols, new standards, and a new architecture, and then we're going to need governance boards, right, for those. But I think start from the bottom of the stack. I mean, really the bottom, open source, core protocols, and work the way up. And then let innovation and creativity proceed, but make sure we've embedded the values, the principles that we want to optimize for, right? Right now we're optimizing for the wrong things, right? We have very, very bad incentives. We need a whole new economic model, a new set of incentives. And as you probably well know, the new internet will be an internet of data and value, not just an internet of data, right? The Web 2 has been all about who can grab and aggregate the data and monetize it. Web 3 is going to be about a value proposition where you and I can get value for our data as well as everyone else. It's a whole new world, potentially.
Which also means that in schools, we have to have this kind of media literacy kind of coursework so that kids can actually, obviously age appropriate, but this can't be after the fact. The guardrails, if kids actually can see and discern and have that kind of knowledge, they will become some of the best check and balances.
Yeah, just very briefly here, just to double tap that point, I think digital literacy education is perhaps the most important tool to give youth agency, right? Even if you make a design change so that they can change
Completely
something,
agree.
if they don't know what that means, what's the point? So I completely agree.
One more. Yes.
Hi, thanks so much for this great panel. I agree with every single thing that has been said. My question for you is something that would add on top of what you've already identified. I'm curious what you think about the role of public education in addition to the legislative checks. And I say that from a position of psychological science, of thinking about human behavior and recognizing after dozens and dozens of panels and talks on the subject, a couple things. One is parents routinely report the number one reason why they let their kids engage with these devices and platforms is because they're afraid that they'll be the only one that's not letting their kid on it. There's no psychological science to indicate that kids suffer, experience any social or psychological consequences for waiting or not being on. The vast majority of kids do not understand how these platforms are being made, how their data are being used, what is being used to make a profit. The role of public education, whether the legislation mandates that tech companies pay for that, or other ways of building a groundswell bottom-up movement, is something that would be so incredibly welcome by communities and families and teachers who are begging for this kind of information. I'm curious what you think about that as an addition to the solutions that you're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think for sure that public education is massively important. And I'll let the educators speak to that, but please, 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 let's not have the tech companies pay for it. I mean, it's like having the gun manufacturers teach us about proper gun usage. You know what I mean? It's just not correct. And I am worried, right, about Chromebooks in all the schools. And I'm worried. I heard of a story of young kids doing an exercise, and it was about colors. And it was using the Google logo to have kids put different colors. You know what I mean? There's indoctrination going on. We need to break free of this and purely educate, and purely think this through for the sake of, the next generation and to fall. By the way, the tech can solve all of our problems. The tech is not the problem. It's how it's being used that's devastating.
So do you have about 20 hours? Let me say in 2 minutes or in a minute this. We have gone through 10 years, 20 years of ed tech can substitute for teachers. And then it became, no, of course they can't. And then it was COVID, and now it's now. And the reason I just go through those 3 major times is because if you remember anything that I say about today, relational work is the most important work that we can do in schools. The second most important work we can do in schools is application of knowledge and critical thinking. And so what unfortunately happened with COVID was that the tech piece became the way to connect people. And so what we need to do right now is we really need to figure out ways that people connect people. And we have public schooling as kind of the center of communities in relationship to each other. Kids and parents coming back to school, talking to each other, looking at each other, figuring out ways to wrap services around schools, dealing in that way. And so that is probably, if we can start doing that, and then ultimately focus on application, hands-on learning, working together in teams, we will then make the Chromebook as an aid and an assist to the human behavior that we need to do. And that's what at least the AFT is trying to do in our Real Solutions campaign. Make it about human beings with each other, in fellowship with each other, in person, in schools.
Well, one of the things that I feel like we don't talk quite enough about in terms of when we look at how much more influence social media has on kids is also the ways in which we lose social capital amongst children the longer social media grows with importance. And so I like to talk about the social skills escalator. So seniors teach freshmen how to no longer be junior high students. And then they become seniors, and then they teach the next set of freshmen how to not be junior high students. And the problem with that cycle is, one, COVID broke it, right? So for 2 years, you got a lot less of it. And so when those new seniors were seniors, they had less to give. But second is, the more kids move online, they literally come into situations where if they want to get back in person, they have a skills gap. And an idea that I really want to do, but I need like the right partner, or we need to figure out the funding because I have other things that I'm working on right now, is imagine if we had college students that came in and mentored clubs of high schoolers to teach social skills, which sounds like really, but like, I remember being a high school student. I thought college students were really cool. And like, I remember being an elementary school student. I thought high school students were gods, right? If we think about like the general psychology of kids, we need to think about how do we actually scalably teach kids how to relate to people in person, because you're totally right. Schools are one of the only like locuses where at scale we can bring together young humans to be humans together in ways that if they don't learn those skills now, we're losing the paths where they might ever get to really develop those skills.
And I love that idea.
One last thing I'll say is just one thing I love about that idea you just suggested is it has a by youth, for youth component to it.
Oh yeah,
right?
it has to be.
And that I think is so key when we think about this education, is because you're right. Young people look up to other young people and they see them as credible, not just in terms of their coolness, but as it relates to this space specifically, as digital natives, right? People who understand the experiences that they're having online. So I think that bringing young people into that educational process, it not only makes them feel like digital citizens, right? Like they have ownership, they're a part of the internet, that they have a responsibility, to keep kind and free from hate and free from misinformation,
care for each
disinformation,
other.
and care for each other. But it also is much more effective because there's so much more legitimacy, right, in that interaction. Totally.
And if you do things like you talk about systems with respect to the internet, I think about systems with respect to public education and with respect to human beings. If we had more and more community schools where you could have an accordion of wraparound services that you could do around schools, you could actually build that kind of program. Like take college students from the neighborhood, community college students, other college students, and they serve as mentors to kids, either in groups or individually. And you can wrap that around a school. You can wrap family work around a school. It's just the point about how do you create cool relationships, and you're teaching social skills as part of doing that. But the school can really be that kind of community.
What a panel. Sometimes I get despondent about this whole issue space. I get despondent about what's happening to kids, what's happening to our democracy, which Frank talked well about, what's happening to our national security. This panel gives all of us hope that we're going to get our arms around this and we're going to get improvement and we're going to get this done. Thank you, thank you, thank you.